Hello and welcome back to the Vanier Woodshop. My name is Mr. Dakinowicz. Today we're going to talk about the sliding compound miter saw, also known as the chop saw. So this is our saw. We're now into the big four, as I like to call them, sort of our stock breakout machines. So this will be after you've selected your wood, you've chosen a piece that you're going to use, be it whatever material that you're using. This is now how we begin the breakout process. So we're going to talk about a couple numbers right now that we'll bring up for the next four machines that we talk about. But the 12-inch minimum length is basically the length that you need to cut all of your material to go through the jointer, the planer, and the table saw. So if you're beginning stock breakout and you're making something smaller than that, everything still needs to be cut at least 12 inches or 305 millimeters in order to use the machines that follow here. So this saw, by the time you see this video, we're going to actually have two miter saws in here. One will be for rough cuts or stock breakout, and one will be for finish cuts. But right now we have the one, so we're going to talk about this one. Like all of our material, or like all of our machines, we have our table, we have a fence. We're going to talk about fences now. It's something that we can push our wood into, so when you're using the machine, you always want to make sure that you're working on the left-hand side. You're only ever cutting with your right hand on this. And we're going to always hold our material on the left. You're going to make sure that our material is firmly down to the table and also firmly pressed into the fence. I like to kind of use a thumb and a finger. You always want to make sure you're at least 6 inches away from the blade at any given time. Just like on other machines, we have a guard here. This guard moves freely. You want to check that it does. So when you walk up, just bring the saw down and up. We know now that our guard is working. This is called sliding because it actually moves forward, so we can cut wider pieces of wood. When you're cutting, you always want to have the saw moving towards the wall while you're cutting. What that looks like, or what that means, is if we were going to cut something wide, we'd bring the saw out, bring it down into our material, and then push backwards as we cut. We don't want to start down and pull towards us because the blade will actually pull the saw towards us, which will cause something called kickback, which we're going to work really hard to avoid. So we're always cutting towards the wall or towards the back of the machine. Now, this is a saw. You, again, always want to have your safety glasses on. You always want to make sure that your eyes are protected. You've got your closed-toed shoes. Hearing protection for this machine is recommended. That's why we have hearing protection hanging right here on the wall. It's really quick to grab when you're making the cut, hang back up. So the parts of this machine, we of course have our on and off. It's a pull switch. There are little red trigger switches that you use with your thumb. Without turning them on or without engaging them, you can't pull the trigger. We have our table. We have a little clip right here that you can pull up to move the saw, to put a miter on it. We're also able to put a bevel on this saw, which means if we lift up on this red lever, we can tilt the saw to the side. For most of the cuts that you're going to do using this, you're always going to have it square to the table and square to the fence. So now that we've got everything set up, we can read our gauge back here at 0. We can read our gauge right here at 0. That's saying that it's 0 degrees. We're good to go. So when I select my material, I want to find stuff that is as straight as possible. Now this is coming straight out of the rack, so sometimes you're going to end up with pieces that are a little bit wonky. This piece right here, if you look at it, I'm sure that you maybe even can see it in the camera angle, has a bow on it this way and this way. So if I was to set this down, it actually rocks. If I put it this way, it actually sits where there's a gap right here that I can fit my whole finger underneath. If you're going to cut something that's like this, it's possible. It's a little bit more dangerous, so you got to pay attention to where and how you cut it. We can't have anything with the gap down because what will happen is as it cuts, that piece of wood will collapse on the blade and it'll cause a kickback. We don't want that. So we're going to make sure if we're cutting something like this that it's pressed firmly down. We've got it down, and if there's a bow in it, that it's held tightly to the left side, because that's the side we're always going to use our hand on to hold the material. And if it bows away on the right side, that's okay. If we're holding it like this, where it's touching on both ends, and they're not touching in the middle, again, you can see my whole finger fits inside, it's going to collapse in pinch on the blade, and the saw is going to pull towards us, causing kickback. We don't want that to happen. We're not going to cut this today. That's my example for how this works. We're going to cut this piece right here. So because I need to cut this at 12 inches, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to remove the first inch of material. The reason I take the first inch of material off when I'm pulling a new piece of wood from the rack, I want to make sure there's no cracks or checks in the end. That way I can check it, make sure that that wood is solid. It's not going to fall apart later in my material or in my cutting board or whatever it is that I'm breaking out for. And then I'm going to measure for 12 inches at least. In this case, I'm actually going to make this piece a little bit longer, but let me demo that cut. So I'm going to grab my hearing protection because it's right here, put it on. Now this will be a little bit loud, but I'm going to cut that last inch off. The other thing that I'm going to note is I'm actually going to make sure that I never cross my arms when I'm using this saw. So what that means is I'm going to always have my arms straight in front of me. So my left hand will always be on the left side of my body. My right hand will always be on the right hand side of my body. Now, to show you how wrong this looks, I'm actually going to unplug this so there's no chance of this saw starting. But if I was to try and cut by holding my left hand here with my right hand here, as I cut down, my arm is right in that path. That's a big no-no. We definitely do not want that to happen. So we're always going to use our left hand on the left side of our body, never crossing our arms. So I'm going to plug my saw back in so that I'm ready to go. I'll put on my hearing protection. I'll cut off the last inch. I'm going to check to make sure it doesn't crack. Then we're going to cut off the other end. And then we'll probably be done this demo very quickly. So you saw when I started this cut, I brought the saw all the way towards me, came down through the wood, and then moved slowly back. You don't want to move too fast, you'll get a really junky cut, and if you go too slow, you'll actually end up burning the wood. So there's a nice happy medium. You can hear the saw working. If it sounds like the saw is slowing down or really struggling to keep up, you're going to slow down your cut. Just, you want to make sure. So now I'm going to cut off the other end, and then we're going to take this over to the jointer for the next video. When I hit that board on the side, I don't have any cracks, no checks. Now I've got my piece of wood. If I need to use a stop or if I need to cut a whole bunch of pieces that are the same size, what I'm going to do is clamp something down or screw something to this bench. What that'll allow me to do is consistently cut pieces the same size. So I would grab a piece of scrap, much like this one that we have here. I'd grab my clamp, I'd clamp it in. I could cut one cut, hold it, cut down, take my next piece, having the stop there, I could come right back in and I would guarantee that those pieces would be the same size. So if I was doing a table or something like that where I needed 4 legs that were exactly the same size so it didn't have a rock, I would want to use the stop. Otherwise, that's the miter saw. Thanks for listening.